Welcome to this new video, the last one in this course on the fundamentals of fire. In this video, we're going to explore the subject of profile constraints. To do that, we are going to use the fictitious but fairly realistic scenario of a group of hospitals in Omaha, which has a profile for doctors or healthcare providers, and that defines a series of constraints so that companies that do risk assessment on these doctors can send the records to the Omaha Hospital Association's practitioner registry. The name of the profile, as you can see here, is OHA PRAP practitioner, and its requirements are quite simple. Obviously, in real life, there would be a lot more, but in this case, we're keeping things simple so that you can understand the requirements and complete them quickly. Basically, the constraints this association imposes on the practitioner resource are that the resource must have a gender extracted from the FIRE vocabulary for gender, that there must be a date of birth, it's mandatory, that the name must be present and must be composed of the given name and the family name. There must also be two identifiers. One of them is the OHA-PR ID identifier, which is assigned by the Hospital Association to the practitioner. And the second is the NPI identifier, the U.S. National Provider Number. So, this resource has to have two identifiers. It must also have a mandatory extension, which is a code extracted from a fixed table that has only 3 values in both the value set and the code system: yellow, red, and green, depending on the number of adverse events that the practitioner has had in the past few years. And it also has to have a phone number. It has to be a local Omaha phone number. And in the text element, which we know is important in FIRE, it also has to have all the information that we've just listed, but in a concatenated text. So what we're going to do is generate a valid example from the implementation guide for this profile. We're going to generate a valid example, and it's going to be in XML. To do that, we need to step back from all these words that we see in the text and look at the structure, what structure this resource should have. And the structure of the resource is going to be very similar to what we see here. This was generated by the authors of the profile in the constraint on the practitioner resource using the Forge tool. And we see that only the things we need to include are visible, and they're in boldface. 2 identifiers: name, phone number, gender, date of birth, and extension. So let's go ahead and start assembling our practitioner resource in XML using Oxygen to see what our valid example of a practitioner would look like. So I'm opening up Oxygen. I'm going to include the identifier first, which is the first thing I'll have to have according to our guide. And it has to have a system. I don't know what it is, but it's fixed. So here I've set up an example with all the data as it should appear in our example to be included in the XML. So we're going to comment out these data so we can copy them or use them as a basis for our resource. Then the first identifier would be the OHA PR ID, and the value for this identifier is 429. It has another identifier. Let's see what the coding system is. The value of that identifier is an NPI number. The NPIs have 10 digits. When you're creating an example, it's good to explain why it includes each of the elements. This requirement is the identifier. It's requirement 4A. The same thing with the second requirement that we are fulfilling. Now we're going to copy the coding system for the first one. And this is the coding system for the second one. The identifier system is generated directly by FHIR. It's one of the official systems because it's the National Registry for U.S. practitioners and providers. So our first element was the identifier, where we met the requirements for identifiers. Note that this is called a slice. There are two mandatory identifiers, and the difference between the two is the system. We know that there has to be one from one system and another from another system. That's why we generated two identifiers for this resource. The next thing we have to fill in, according to the standard, is the name. Our specification indicates that both the given and the family names must be included. Both are mandatory. So we are going to include both. I put in given, I put in family. Whoops, family is supposed to come first. That's why it didn't suggest it. Family is requirement 3B, and this is 3A. If someone asks us why we included a certain element, we included it according to the requirement of the implementation guide. In this case, the family name is Gaynor, and we say it is 3A. And this way we know why we're including these elements in our resource. The next thing it asks for is, let's take a look. It's the phone number with a system that says it's phone, and the value has to be the practitioner's phone number. This requirement is number 6. Next, what else does it ask for? It asks us for the text and the extension. We still don't have the gender and the date of birth. We're going in the order of the XML. So what comes next is the gender, and finally the date of birth. The gender in this case will be female. Gender is requirement number 1. If we were building software to meet this requirement, this would be the template or model that we would prepare for our developers so they would know what they have to set up and why. And the only thing we have left is the date of birth. Let's just take a look to double check. Yes, the last thing is the date of birth, and after that we don't have any more elements in our obligatory resources. The date has to be in FHIR format, 1958-03-02, and this was requirement number 2. Whenever you're doing this, just do a save every once in a while. And we still have some more things that we need to do. We have to define where we put the extension, how we put in the text that this template asks us to include, and how we tell the system that's going to receive this instance of practitioner that we've complied with the template. So those are the 3 things we have left to do. Put in the risk assessment, which is an extension that's in the standard somewhere. Put in the text, and put in the fact that we've complied with this guideline. The first thing then is to include the extension. When we include an extension, it asks us to put the URL of the extension. So let's see what our extension's URL is. In this case, it's this one right here. Each extension has a defined URL. It's part of the definition of the extension. So we're going to put it in when we include it. In this case, this definition doesn't exist. It's only in the Word file that we're looking at. But if there were a place where this extension was defined, it would be the one from there. But in this case, we've just made it up. And what it says is that it has a value that is a single code, a code with no code system. In this case, it's called a value code. The only thing we need to put in the case of the value code is the code. We don't have to put the system. The code goes in value. What is the value for yellow? We'll check our list in our coding system that's here in the guide. It says the code for yellow is Y. So for Dr. Gaynor, we're going to include the code Y, and that is our extension. This is where it goes before all the elements that belong to the resource itself. We're going to copy our requirement so that it is consistent with everything else we're doing. So this fulfills requirement 5. And now we have to put all this information in the text. Where should it go? It's going to be text, and we always put text inside the div. Now I need to look for all this information that I need to put in, and where do I get it? From here, where we already had it parked. Now we have to declare that we are complying with the guide. We'll also put in a comment to keep everything defined for ourselves. The text was requirement 7. We're going to say that we generated it. Theoretically, we generated it from the information that's down below. We actually did both things at the same time, but it is very simple in any programming language to include these data in both places at the same time. We have to declare that we've complied with the implementation guide. To declare that we comply with the implementation guide, we use something called meta. And in the meta, we declare the profile with the value of the profile. The value of the profile we're going to get from the specification. It's right at the beginning. This is the name of the profile, the canonical ID of the profile. It's not actually on that site. Remember that all this is fake. It doesn't really exist. Let's declare the profile. And we finished putting together our resource that complies with that guide. We're going to declare the profile that we're conforming to, and we've included the information for each of the elements that are required. And in the comments, we've also indicated which part of the requirement we are fulfilling. And that concludes our last video. I thank you very much for your time.